It's back to Armando again because the books are out. The very legitimate, officially copyrighted, non-plagiarized re-release of God Is, and Armando's brand new, entirely original book, A Conscious Universe. Now, I had some trouble figuring out how I wanted to structure this. Armando made another video in January announcing the release of both of these books, and although we've heard most of what's in it before, the presentation is truly spectacular. And I think we all want a video about that, so I'm going to do that. But in that video, he makes a whole bunch of assertions about the re-release of God Is, which are simply factually false. And so my first thought was that maybe as I review the updates, I'll interlace that into his video, sort of respond to both at once, the book itself and him. But I started doing it that way and it just felt a little bit awkward and weird and unfocused. So reset, we're going to do it this way. First, I'm going to dedicate a video just to taking a look at the book, and then I'll look at his video and respond to his points about the book with reference to my previous video about the book, which is this one. I think that'll be less confusing and strange. So, God Is. I'm sure almost all of you have seen the videos. If you haven't, and you don't understand just how awful this book is, you may want to go back and watch them. What's bad about this book is not the arguments. Well, okay, it is the arguments. Of course it's the arguments, but that's not the main thing. If this were just a book with bad arguments, it wouldn't be very special. We've seen those before. Sometimes a book with uniquely bad arguments is special because of that, such as All In for God, but most of the time, apologetics books are pretty similar to each other. The arguments are bad, but you've seen them all before. What makes God Is especially bad is the insane amount of plagiarism. It's both utterly shameful and shameless at the same time. Isn't that funny how those words work? I just noticed that. So the question is, what would it take for a second edition of this book to be anything other than a total disaster? Well, the pages and pages and pages and pages of other people's material that he presents as his own would have to be removed. That's pretty much the only requirement. Now, that's not to say any of the arguments or the sections of the book would have to be removed. He could use the information that he's previously stolen as a source of information on which he can base his own words. And then he could put a reference in the back saying this information came from so-and-so. For some of the more minor instances of plagiarism, the ones that don't go on for tens of pages at a stretch, he could reformat them as quotations, and then again, cite the source. For some reason, Armando seems very attached to this book. The fact that he still hasn't backed down from defending it, doubling down on it, republishing it, there's some sort of emotional commitment here, and okay, fine. Then commit in other ways too. Commit your time, commit your effort. This book doesn't have to be a disaster forever. Whatever was going on in that first edition, be that intentional dishonesty or some bizarre, naive mistake that honestly I have trouble wrapping my head around, it can be undone with just a little bit of self-reflection and a little bit of effort. Make it so that it is in fact your book, and then when you sell it, everything will be fine. If you've made those changes in this new version of the book, I'll have nothing but positive things to say. I won't even argue with you. I won't even try to refute the arguments in the book. I'll just be happy that you've learned your lesson and stopped acting like a complete fraud. But I've already reviewed the book. It didn't take long. If there were meaningful changes here, it would be obvious just from looking at the pages. I wouldn't even have to read them to know there was something very different. But there's nothing different. Nothing. Not in the text of the main body of the book, at least. Not even basic spelling corrections. You still have Christiany on page 76, and Judaism on page 72, and Judaeams on page 71, and so on, and so on. So you weren't lying when you said this.
This still has the same material in here. Nothing inside has changed, okay? It's only the outside look and the stamp of approval, of course.
I knew what to expect, and yet somehow, for some reason, I still expected more. I don't know why. I guess I'm just an optimist. There are a few things inside the cover that are changed. They're not main body text, but they are changed. First, Armando wisely chose to remove the Disney-owned Futurama character from page 41, although I don't think that change is new here, because there's one version of this book that I don't have, which is a second version that he very briefly released during the initial controversy, and from what I've heard, that one also does not have the Disney character on page 41. Another change, which I don't think is new here, is this unfathomable addition to the title page. This is an elaboration book of other projects I've read. There are many arguments used from different apologists. that I had expounded upon in further details. The concept of this book is intended to add to arguments presented by the great names mentioned, not intended for copyright or plagiarism. All credit is given to every name on the last page. Thank you. If it's not intended for copyright, why have you been going on so much about how you got it copyrighted? We'll get to that. But not intended for plagiarism. What a thing to print in a book. You know, that's exactly what I'd expect to see in a totally legitimate, not plagiarized book. Every book I own has that. See it all the time. Totally normal. Nothing fishy here. You know, I guess I'd better stop accusing Armando of plagiarism just because he committed rampant, obvious, shameless, blatant plagiarism. Because look, the book told me it's not intended for plagiarism. So that all checks out then. How can I say there's a problem when the book says there's not? How can I say something that the book disagrees with? I mean, I wouldn't do that with the Bible, so I certainly won't do that here. But this too, I believe, was in the second edition of the book that I didn't get. So really, inside the cover of this book, there's not a lot that's new. The only other thing that's different from my original copy is a very slight change to the inspiration page. Now, this title page says all credit is given to every name on the last page, but that's just outright false. Armando's list doesn't even begin to cover the list of places I found him plagiarizing from. And of course, just because you put the name of someone who you plagiarized from into a list doesn't make it not plagiarism. But anyway, here's the page for you to compare. In the original version, this book was an inspirational-driven project. A big thank you to some of the greatest Christian apologists. And in the new version, this book was an inspirational-driven project. Many arguments are elaborated from the arguments and writings of these big names. A big thank you and all credit to some of the greatest Christian apologists and more. Wow, that does nothing. The list is exactly the same. He didn't even bother to capitalize the Lane in William Lane Craig. He didn't bother to fix Norman Geisler to Norman Geisler. Just zero interest in fixing mistakes. Doesn't care. The only real change to this list is that he added "and more" at the bottom, which would seem to conflict with the assertion on the title page that you've listed everyone. Writing "and more" doesn't count as adding everyone you've missed to the list. Incredible laziness. Now, because Armando added an extra line at the top there, the final paragraph on this inspiration page got pushed down a little bit and some of it went to the next page, which originally was supposed to be one of the notes pages. That's why it says "write your thoughts here." But now that's pushed down and just awkwardly left on this page. And because that's pushed down, the writing prompts on the next page are also pushed down because he didn't use page breaks, he used line breaks. And so now they're weirdly low on the page, and he just left it that way. Because who cares? Who cares? That might as well be the name of the book. That would be a far more appropriate title. Oh, and speaking of which, Jesus' head is still cut off on page 129. So, has anything else changed inside this book? Well, no, but for me there were two obvious candidates to look at first that I thought surely would be fixed. The first was the table of context. It's still the table of context, and the numbers that were wrong are all still wrong. This shit is automated. How do you not get this right? More importantly, how do you not get this right over 3 editions of the same book? Well, because you don't care and you're lazy. The second obvious change that I just assumed would have been made is the ISBN. I thought it would either be removed or fixed. Now, to Armando's credit, the fake one from the back cover has been removed. I assume that's just because he needed more room for other stuff, because he clearly doesn't care about wrong ISBNs, because the ISBN on the title page still points to The Mindful Moody Mentality by Anthony Moody. And that, I believe, is all there is to say that requires the book to be open. Everything else that's different or worth commenting on is on the cover. If you can believe it. Which I know you can, but why should you have to? So, of course, a lot of this we've seen before. The cover says, "New look!" as if it's a box of cookies that's undergone a slight rebranding. This is just not necessary on a book. But I will say there certainly is a new look, and I do like it better. I'm still not a huge fan, but it is significantly better. The font's prettier, the background's less pixely, and I guess that's pretty much all there is to it, because there's not much going on here. Surprisingly, the book's the same size as the original God Is. I thought he was going to change that, maybe I'm just misremembering. The subtitle is still just as repetitive as it was before. The inescapable truth of an all-knowing, almighty, omniscient, omnipotent, all-powerful creator. So, almighty, omnipotent, all-powerful, that's a repetition. All-knowing, omniscient, that's a repetition. That probably should have been changed by the 3rd edition, but what are you gonna do? The spine of the book is still upside down, like it's a German book or something, but at least the author's been corrected, sort of. It used to say Blue Shepherd Studio, which was very confusing because that's a business that Almondo's friend runs. But now it says Christ Righteous Ministries, which at least is Almondo's own thing, but that's still not the author of the book. The author of the book is Almondo L. Calvo. That's why that's printed on the front cover and the title page. This is not a general effort of the ministry. This is an effort of Almondo himself. And I understand that Christ Righteous Ministries is almost certainly just Almondo. I get that. But the organization is still not the author of this book. Almondo is. It's his book. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it would be acceptable to assign authorship of the book to the ministry, but in that case, you have to do that consistently. Why do you have your name on the front and your ministry's name on the side? Now, I believe at one point Almondo was very excited about the texture of the cover. It's got a very different texture from the original. The original has just a glossy, laminated cover. The kind where the plastic starts peeling off the edges as you read. I don't like that. It's got a real cheapness to it. So I think Almondo did well to change that. And this new matte cover is actually really nice. Just the texture, I mean. All In for God also has a matte cover, but it's that horrible kind where the grease from your fingers sticks onto it and then you get these glossy patches on it where your fingers were, and it just never looks right ever again. This new God Is not like that. It barely picks up the grease. It's really good. So good job, Lulu. That's one thing I like about your company. It's the only one so far, but at least the list is growing. Onto the back cover. Originally it said, inspired by Frank Turek, Greg Kokel, William L. Craig, J. Warner Wallace, Norman Geisler, and others. Now it says, inspired by and credit to Dr. Frank Turek, Greg Kokel, and he added an H that's not supposed to be there, thus taking correct spelling and making it wrong. How? It reminds me of what supposedly happened with the word ghost. Look up why the word ghost has an H in it. And yeah, of course, saying credit to doesn't excuse plagiarism. You can't just say credit to Frank Turek and then expect that you'll get away with stealing a bunch of stuff out of Frank Turek's book and presenting it as your own. The stuff that was taken is not presented as quotations. It's presented as original work in the book. You could list every source you use, which you don't. But if you did, it would still be plagiarism because of the way it's presented. Now, at the bottom of the back cover, there's an additional list of resources used, and this seems to be the reason that he removed the fake barcode and ISBN. Just for space reasons, because, what better reason could there be? An incredible elaboration of... No, don't call your own book incredible. Please. If you had a publisher and they were putting that stuff on there to promote it for you, fine. That's their business. Don't do that on a self-published book. Have some humility. I wouldn't even consider that acceptable on a good book. But okay, an incredible elaboration of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Dr. Frank Turek and Norman Geisler? No? Okay, just Frank Turek then. Tactics by Greg Kokel, Reasonable Faith by William L. Craig, If God, Why Evil by Norman L. Geisler, Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh and Sean McDowell, Defending Your Faith by R.C. Sproul, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and much more. Again with the much more. But now that's an interesting list. If I wanted to bother to go through this whole book again, I could probably find a lot more instances of plagiarism by comparing stuff against this list. I don't think it's worth it, but there was definitely stuff in here that I suspected was plagiarized, which I just couldn't find a source for, and I bet those sources would help. Again, Almondo, if you copy out of a book and paste it into yours, with no mention in your book that it comes from somewhere else, no sign that it's a quotation from someone else, that's you trying to pass it off as your own. That's plagiarism. It doesn't matter if the original source happens to be in a list on the back cover if there's nothing within the text of the book to make it clear what you're doing. If you ever decide to go to college, do not do this. If you pull that shit there, you're gonna learn the hard way that I'm right. I'm trying to teach you this the easy way. Now, the resources list goes on. Quote is, I'll expand the contraction, and resources from ChristianApologeticsalliance.com, reasonablefaith.org, crossexamined.org, apologetics.substack.com, ideacenter.org, Baker Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics. Great, well, that's some of them. It still gives no indication what came from where, but at least you've added some things to a list. I only have a link to one of those in my book review script, and that's ChristianApologeticsalliance.com. The rest of them are probably places where you changed the text enough to not make it super obvious, or stuff I just didn't pick up on or bother to search. But that list barely even begins to scratch the surface of the plagiarism that I found. Go watch the videos, there's so much more than this. This list is just a fraction of what should be here. And again, you can't just go to some website, copy multiple pages of material into your book with no sign that it's a quotation, no mention of where it's from, or that it's from somewhere else at all, and expect people to treat that as though it's not plagiarism. I mean, good, you added a mention of some of your sources to the back cover of your book. Great. That doesn't fix the problem. If you really cannot resist copying multiple paragraphs at a time from somebody into your book, at least present that as a block quote with a reference to a notes section in the back so it's clear what that is and where it's from. With some of the copying you did, the quantity was so extreme that I don't really know if you could get away with it if you were challenged legally, even if you cited your sources properly. But that's not an issue for me. I'm not the copyright police. I'm not here to enforce somebody else's copyright. If somebody else has a problem with you, as far as that's concerned, they can take whatever steps they feel are right. I'm not a copyright guy. I'm not a huge fan of it, frankly. None of this is about that. This is about dignity and effort and honesty. And by your actions and your words, you've exhibited none of those. Not at any point through this entire series of events. But speaking of copyright, actually no, let's save the best for last. First, let's compare the back cover text. The undeniable truth of reality has changed to the irrefutable truth of reality, I assume because it's clearly possible to deny that this is in fact the truth. The whole world as we know it now has completely removed God from every part of its convenience. Still makes no sense, but it's the same as it was. Except that he added a comma after now for reasons unknown. Atheists have denied even the most plausible and valid evidence, valid is new, for God's existence, I guess that's multiple gods because it's pluralized, by replacing that fact with ridiculous concepts and theories. What happened to seeking and accepting the truth? The accepting is new. If it's true that God exists, that's still not fixed, wouldn't you want to know? He put an apostrophe in wouldn't, that's good. Do we have actual evidence for God's existence? Now, previously that was existence, so that's a correction. I don't understand why any errors are left if you were going to do corrections. Why wouldn't you just run it through a spelling and grammar checker? But I'll take what I can get, I guess. Or is this a case of the God of the Gaps fallacy? I believe we have more evidence and even better arguments for God's existence. Oh yeah, that was also existence because I think Almondo actually thought that's how you spell existence, so that's also fixed. Then against him. I believe that with an honest investigation through the evidence and a careful observation through the information, we can discover that not only does God exist, but he has revealed himself to all of mankind. The creator, and here that used to be creator, so very good fix, of the entire, that used to be Enitra, again great fix, universe, made himself known to the whole world. But before we get that far, we must first answer the question, which used to be question, does God exist? Okay, so clearly an improvement. It's a very limited improvement, and this mostly still makes no sense. I understand roughly what Almondo's trying to say, but man, the way he writes is just not the clearest, to put it charitably. But unlike the rest of the book, he at least put in a couple minutes of effort here, which is a lot less than I hoped for, but probably a lot more than I ever should have hoped for. But now, finally, the last thing to talk about, and the thing I really want to talk about. Copyright 2022 to 2023, Almondo Calvo, all rights reserved. Let's remind ourselves what Almondo was saying about this.
Copyright officially, don't mind my finger, but I got it copyrighted, all rights reserved. It has been copyrighted, so all rights are reserved. All of the content in here belongs to me. And here we go. Copyright. All rights reserved. You guys see it here from 2022 to 2023. All rights are reserved. Officially, I had to get it reviewed, and I kind of wanted to get it copyrighted anyways because I wanted to make sure that everything in my book is good and that I could sell it, and so that it can pretty much just shut all the controversy down about, oh, like, quote unquote plagiarism and stuff like that. So I wanted to get it professionally checked. If they say, oh, that's not even a legit book or whatever. No, actually, yeah, it is. Stamp of approval right there.
Now, if you'll recall, I was pretty confused about what he was saying here. For one thing, he never specifies exactly what he means by getting his book reviewed and copyrighted. My assumption, of course, was that he registered it with the US Copyright Office. If that were the case, I was not convinced they would be running plagiarism checks on his book. And of course, if they did run some sort of automated, computerized plagiarism check on his book, the computer would have started smoking and exploded. And if somehow the US Copyright Office checked his book for plagiarism and found none, that wouldn't change the facts of the matter. That would just mean their system's broken. I was also confused because he refers to the copyright symbol as a seal of approval, as if it indicates approval by some sort of governing body, which of course it doesn't. When you write a book, you already own the copyright. You can put copyright symbols all over it with nobody's approval. It in no way implies legitimacy, or that there are no copyright issues, or that some authority has approved your work. So I was incredibly confused what he was talking about. And I still am. I've looked up his name and his book at the US Copyright Office and found nothing. I also searched for Christ Righteous and Blue Shepherd, and even Levi Hernandez. There is no record of a copyright being registered for this book. So maybe the statement on the title page that this book is not intended for copyright was correct. I've thought about this, and I still have no idea what he thinks has happened. Did someone come to him and say, hey, listen, I heard you got problems with accusations of plagiarism. Give me $50 and I'll officially review your book, and then you can start using the copyright symbol and prove that you didn't plagiarize? I guess it's possible that he just got scammed like that somehow, but honestly, I don't find that very believable. I think it's more likely that he's just lying. He didn't register this book with the Copyright Office. He didn't get it checked by anyone, whatever the hell that means. He just put a copyright symbol on it and hoped that people thought that was some sort of official seal of approval, and then left him alone about the plagiarism because somehow that proves them wrong. Well, it doesn't, of course. It has no meaning. It's completely worthless. Now, do I know that he's lying about this? No, of course not. He could be an honest fool in this case, but his track record just makes that seem unlikely to me. I don't think he's the smartest guy, but I don't think that's the issue. I think he's just extremely dishonest, a chronic liar. That's all I've seen through all these videos. When someone calls you out for something you did, lie about it, and when they point out that that's an obvious lie, lie more. Even in cases where there seems to be no point to lying at all, he seems to choose to lie. It seems to be some sort of compulsion. So that's the current state of God is. No lessons learned, a few half-hearted attempts to deflect criticism, and apparently completely fake copyright registration, unless I'm missing something incredibly obvious, but I don't think I am. So everything we've come to expect. Laziness, lies, a firm commitment to keeping all the plagiarism and pretending it's not plagiarism. You know, it'd be nice if at some point during this plotline there was some kind of character development. And maybe there is, but most of it seems to be for the worse. But okay, I'll be back with more Almondo, first responding to his video, and then moving on to reviewing his new book, which must surely be better. Right? So thanks for watching, and if you would, before you go, please give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. And if you like the channel, please do consider supporting. Even a small amount per video or per month helps a lot. $5 supporters on Patreon get access to a library of exclusive videos. I think at the $5 tier there are 40 now, and then on the $10 tier there are 29 more, which are the older ones from when the exclusives were just for the $10 patrons. So the total's almost up to 70. That's surprising even to me. Huge thanks to all of my supporters, and if you want early access, sign up to the email list.logicked.com. Of course, supporters also get really early access. Anyway, I'll see you next time.